Secretary Miller, I have never been more offended on this committee by a witness statement than yours. You were more concerned about defending your own reputation and justifying your own actions than the sanctity of this Capitol and the sanctity of our democracy. Have you no sense of accountability? No sense of shame? Secretary Miller, I want to ask you today, will you at the very least apologize to the American public for what happened on your watch?
I want to highlight the incredible job that the members of our armed forces and the civilians.
Secretary Miller, I agree with you about the armed forces. Secretary Miller, it's my time. Your pugnacious style is not going to override the democratic process. Learn to respect it. My question isn't about our troops or our armed forces. Everyone recognizes they're extraordinary. My question is about your incompetence in leading them. Will you apologize to the American public for what happened on your watch? Will you apologize to the troops for what happened on your watch?
The Department of Defense and our members of the armed forces performed magnificently on January 6th.
Secretary, no one is questioning what they did. By questioning what you did, is it your testimony that you refuse to apologize to the American public for what happened?
I stand by every decision I made on January 6th.
So you think you did everything perfectly? Just like the president said he did everything perfectly in his calls. Is that your testimony? You did everything perfectly, no mistakes?
I want to highlight again that the armed forces should only be used for domestic law enforcement.
Is it your testimony that you did everything perfectly? Is that your view?
I am the most critical person. I'm a career special operator.
Let me ask you this. Did you or anyone in your office ever try to get a hold of President Trump on January 6th?
I did not. I have no idea about others in my office.
Did anyone in your office in the Department of Defense try to get a hold of the president?
Not that I'm aware of.
You testified that things are like a video game, aren't like a video game, and that we can't quickly move troops. What explains the 36-minute delay from when you ordered the National Guard to that order being received? What explains 36 minutes?
What 36 minutes are you referring to?
Before the order was understood. You ordered the authorization, and 36 minutes later. Are you not aware of that timeline? And everyone in the country is aware that it took 36 minutes. What explains that delay?
I have seen so many timelines and inaccurate information.
So you were in charge of the whole department. Senator Blunt has questioned in a hearing that every American watched why it took 36 minutes. And you don't know that it took 36 minutes before you authorized something for it to actually be implemented?
What 36 minutes again are you referring to? At 3 o'clock you gave the order.
It's unbelievable. How can you talk about this being doing everything perfect when you're not even aware of the 36 minutes that took place before you were?
Historians and members still argue about who landed where and when on June 6, 1944.
This is not arguing about who landed when and where. It's saying, here's what happened. You said, okay, the National Guard should go out. It took 36 minutes before that order was implemented. And you're saying you didn't know that it took 36 minutes? Senators know, Congress people know, every journalist knows, and you who made the order doesn't know? That's worse than if you knew and would explain why it didn't happen. And then you're here telling us that everything happened perfectly and you're not willing to apologize? And the goal to hide behind our troops who are extraordinarily honorable, it's you who's let them down. I can't believe we have someone like you in that role, had someone like you. And your whole testimony is no reflection. I mean, I thought if you came here, if you apologized, instead it's total self-promotion. All you're trying to do is cover your own reputation.
It's like the guy isn't even human, just some bot pre-programmed to give the same 2 or 3 boilerplate responses. Representative Ro Khanna asked a straightforward question as to whether former Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller takes responsibility for what happened on his watch on January 6th. And over, all Miller can repeat is that law enforcement did a great job. And if it wasn't bad enough that he refuses to simply answer the question and take responsibility when the buck clearly stops with him, what's even worse is that he's willing to use members of the military as a diversionary tactic to evade accountability. The guy is literally using law enforcement as a shield to protect himself. But sure, party of the military. Consider too, this is evidence of Miller's complete and total inability to admit to making any mistakes. At no point amid his cookie-cutter responses and diversions did he admit to doing anything wrong, even though as the acting Secretary of Defense, he was in charge. And if that sounds familiar, that's because his boss, Donald Trump, did the exact same thing, exercising some backwards notion that it's strong to simply never admit fault, even if you were obviously, glaringly, clearly at fault. But that doesn't make you strong, it makes you incompetent and self-important. Although in Miller's defense, that was pretty much the theme of the previous administration. Miller's also wholly unable to account for the 36-minute gap in approving a deployment plan at the Capitol and actually communicating that approval to Major General William Walker, head of the DC National Guard. The implication, of course, being that Trump reveled in the chaos, and so a Trump lackey like Miller wasn't necessarily falling over himself to put an end to it, which, if true, would mean that lives were lost because a bunch of partisan hacks thought that mayhem was justified punishment for the fact that they lost the election, because for the umpteenth time, their only priority is their own grip on power. Instead, Miller decided to play games and pretend that he has no idea what 36-minute delay Representative Khanna is referring to, because after all, there were so many timelines, and so who knows what to believe anymore. How could he possibly have known which 36-minute delay is being referenced here? In other words, Miller is claiming that he did everything absolutely perfectly, 10 out of 10, wouldn't change a thing, and yet at the same time, he isn't even aware of the most basic facts surrounding this case. In reality, of course he knows about the delay, but the whole point of Miller's testimony is to play dumb and pretend that he doesn't know up from down and right from wrong so that he doesn't have to actually answer for any of the questions being asked of him during his testimony. Avoiding accountability isn't a bug, it's a feature. And by the way, Miller's 36-minute delay pales in comparison to the more than 3-hour delay while Walker was waiting for senior military leaders to actually approve his request to send troops to the Capitol. What has become abundantly clear is that help was needed, and those in a position to grant that help seemed to be in no rush to do so, considering the perpetrators were literally supporting them. Now, Miller had also said that he was concerned that a preemptive deployment of military forces would stoke conspiracy theories about a military coup, and that the Defense Department moved as quickly as possible. Right, we couldn't possibly have troops present because that might be bad optics. I wonder what Miller thought of the optics of an armed insurrection storming the US Capitol with Confederate flags. I wonder what he thought of the optics of rioters bludgeoning police officers. I wonder what he thought of the optics of looting the offices of lawmakers and smearing shit on the walls of the Capitol and positioning a gallows to hang the vice president. But still, we couldn't possibly afford the optics of law enforcement setting up a protective perimeter. Got it. And as for the Department of Defense moving as quickly as possible, Miller explains saying, quote, "Those of you with military experience or who understand the nature of military deployments will recognize how rapid our response was." We're talking about the DC National Guard getting deployed within Washington, D.C., and yet it still took hours. They weren't getting deployed to Afghanistan, they were in the same city. You don't have to be an expert in military deployments to recognize that what happened on January 6th wasn't even close to competence. So these Trump administration officials like Christopher Miller can continue to obfuscate the facts and obstruct congressional hearings all in service of protecting himself? But if his goal was to convince anyone that what happened on January 6th was above board, his appearance was nothing more than an abject failure. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.